Good afternoon. Welcome to Don't Ask That Question. I'm Kelly O'Mara, and today we're going to talk about freedom of speech in the United States of America today. My guest is Scott Stanley. I met Scott back in 1999 when he was my managing editor of the Washington Times Insight magazine. I was just a cub reporter at the time. Scott has been in journalism field for 45 years. He pioneered the interactive news business as designer and editor-in-chief of American Press International. He also launched, managed, and edited the Washington Times Insight magazine, which under his leadership received more traffic than Time, Newsweek, and U.S. News. Scott is a popular speaker and has frequently appeared on national television shows such as MSNBC, Fox, CNN, and C-SPAN. I'm so pleased to have Scott on the show. Welcome. It's a pleasure to see you after such a long time.
It's always good to see Lioness still at war over truth, justice, and the American way.
Absolutely, we have to do this, right, Scott? I mean, it never ends, right?
That's right. It's a compulsion.
Yeah, it actually is. I mean, even if you're not putting something out publicly, I mean, I'm yelling at the TV all the time. So let's get started. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and we can take this any direction you want. So you've been in the journalism field for more than 4 decades. Can you talk about some of the major issues that you've covered, either as writing about them or either editing, and which ones you've covered that you think maybe changed or influenced the American point of view?
Oh my goodness! I remember covering the Kennedy assassination.
Wow.
And my first inkling of just how nasty the old wokeism was, when every periodical in America was liberal. There was liberal at least, and then of course they ranged all the way to radical and even communist publications at that time. But the left was so determined to blame the assassination on the right that there were many articles about how Kennedy was really killed not by the Russian trained communist Lee Harvey Oswald or some other area of gangsterism, but that he was really killed by the city of Dallas, which everyone knows is a center of conservatism, and these right-wingers are terrible. In fact, the then Chief Justice of the US Supreme Court declared within a week of the assassination that the John Birch Society had killed President Kennedy, and the Birch offices and their bookstores all around the country, windows were broken, guns were fired, shots were fired into them. It was madness, but it was just business as usual for the left, and they're still at it.
Well, yeah, I was going to say it hasn't really changed. Look at the Roe v. Wade thing. I mean, it hasn't even, the opinion hasn't even come out, although it's been leaked, but they're going crazy.
Yeah, well, it's a short trip for most of them. The Roe v. Wade stuff, the vulgarism of that whole issue was there, and it was going to repeat wherever it was hauled back. But the notion that this is somehow inappropriate or unprecedented, that there should be a reversal, is just silly. Supreme Court's reversing things all the time.
Right, but this one, they seem to think. I thought it was interesting. I watched something on Facebook, and when they were asked, these women who were marching after, the leak came out, you know, why are you so upset about, this change? Because it's my body, my choice, they said. And the guy asked him, he said, well, how did you feel about the vaccine mandate?
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I was for it because that's about, protecting other people. Well, no,
Sure.
it's my body, my choice. It doesn't, that doesn't end just because, there's some sort of flu going around. So
Well,
it's
it's
kind of
one thing.
interesting.
You're right. You're dead right about that. And of course, the problem with making those points is that all you do is show that they are hypocrites. These people are not hypocrites. These people are screaming for laws that would allow the butchering of an infant right up to the point of birth.
Right.
Pull them out and bash their brains in, and it's gone from, well, let's set a reasonable date, because the science came in and said, hey, look, you've got viability well past what was known at the time of Roe v. Wade. So where
It's
does it
murder.
where does it go now? Well, do you go to the end of viability? No, that's not what they want to do. They want to take this a step further. No, miles further, to the point of pulling an infant from its mother's body and crushing it on a table. Now, it seems to me that may be a little extreme.
Right. And again, look, let's be clear. They can still do this in whatever state allows it. The only thing this decision decides is says this is not a federal issue. This is a state issue, which is, I think, is correct. Let states determine how they're going to handle this issue, and that's as it should have always been. So there are going to be states, I think, who are going to allow it right up to the minute of birth, and some that'll say no, you can't do it at all. So I mean, I don't know why everybody. I frankly don't know what everybody's upset about at this point. It doesn't change anything other than the taxpayers don't have to pay for it now.
Well, they're very selective about what should be allowed in the states. For example, they want voting to be done in boxes set around in the dark of the local park. They want people to be able to vote for weeks and weeks in advance, and even for weeks afterward, so that they can play with the politicians. The politicians can play with opportunities to cheat on elections. So when is someone going to step forward and say, with regard to elections, for example, well, we've got an election day, you come to the polls, you vote, and that's it.
I
None
agree.
of this playing around. Let's get it in there. Let's count it. Let's count it by hand if necessary. And it's so easy.
Well, I mean,
That.
I think it's gone beyond that, Scott. I think it's demeaning to people of color. I mean, the reasons they're using it is, oh, well, these people don't have, identification. They don't have a computer. They don't have a web. I mean, it's so demeaning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
it really is.
I agree completely with that. The origins of setting that date, what I think ought to be done is I think you ought to have an election day and leave it there. But it was always kind of variable because it'd been left to the states. And by 1792, the federal law permitted elections within a 34-day period. Before the first Wednesday in December. That's how we got to the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. They set it firmly. And why that late? Well, November was harvest, and of course, most Americans were busy with harvest. December, they got a little break, and it was before the really hard winter set in New England and in the mountain areas. So that's what it was. But in 1845, because of the invention of the telegraph, where news would go as to how Maine went, so goes Vermont or New York or something. So they decided to change it, and they had federal statutes that established it as the first Monday after the first Tuesday after the first Monday. All right, that's a long time precedent. Perhaps we should speak to them about precedents that shouldn't be overturned after 50 years. Maybe we ought to require that they be consistent, but of course they're not consistent. These are radicals, and they mean to have things their own way for whatever reason they can crank up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's during the last election, there were so many questionable things that happened. And unfortunately, I don't see that many of the states, and certainly not the federal government, Congress has done nothing to ensure that there's going to be an honest election. And I think that's extremely important for our, republic, our democracy, that we have elections that we can trust. I don't know that we got that out of the last election. And I think there's, like I said at the beginning, I think there's plenty of evidence to show that it wasn't an honest election.
Oh, I quite agree with you. And I think that D'Souza has pretty well established that in his documentary film, and
2000 Mules.
Yes, and the mules were people who were moving around the ballots. But Dinesh he's a very careful fellow when it comes to his documentaries, which have been very well received. This particular one, I'm informed, was so well thought of. There was so much stir about it that it cleared $1 million in the first 12 hours. It was offered online, and it's continued to grow because, of course, we heard from our friends on the left, our woke friends, that it's a lie. It's a lie that the election was dishonest.
Right.
Well, it's not a lie, and Dinesh has photographs in the key states, which, had they gone the other way, would have put Trump into the White House. They have photographs of their of these mules cheating on the election and moving the stuff around, and there's no question about it. It's hard evidence. There it is.
Right.
So
and yet,
what do they say about it?
Congress does nothing.
Well, it isn't just Congress. It's the media as well, Kelly.
Sure.
The reports are pretty heavy that Fox News has made even discussion of the 2000 Mules film off limits.
Right.
And for Pete's sake, Laura Ingraham was engaged to this guy.
Right.
Well,
let's go back. I don't know if you stayed up. I did here out where I live in the West. And I remember distinctly, I was watching Fox News, and it was about 11 o'clock my time. And Trump was ahead by an enormous percentage point in all three: Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, and they just stopped counting. And not one of the people at the Fox desk said, hey, that's odd. How, well, what's up? Why are they just stopping? Right? Nobody even said a word. And I thought, wait a minute, guys, this is unprecedented and you're not saying anything, right? So the next morning we wake up, guess what? Trump lost all of his percentage, his enormous percentage, and lost those states overnight when they weren't counting. I mean, come on. So Fox News, I think, has a lot of answering to do for election night. I
Right.
have never been happy with what happened with Fox News on election night.
Yeah, I haven't either. My poet friend Merrill Root, who'd been he'd been one of the original editors of National Review, and then it had a fight with Buckley over Buckley's efforts to denounce Ayn Rand, saying she wasn't really, a trustworthy person on the right, and Robert Welch said he wasn't trustworthy on the right, this, that, and the other one, and Merrill just left the masthead of National Review, and I asked him, "What do you think of Bill Buckley?" I thought I'd get the real inside story. And he said, Bill Buckley, he is so good. Merrill was a gentle Quaker soul. He is so good. It was hard for him to say anything bad about anyone. He was struggled. He is so good that he ought to be better. Well, that's Fox News. They are so good that they ought to be better.
Yes, I agree. So this is a very broad question. Just want to touch on it. I mean, how do you think journalism has changed since you got into it? Good or bad?
Well, there were actual standards, some until very recently. One thing you did not do in a newspaper, in the news sections, was to insert opinion. Now, even at very conservative journals, such as Insight on the News at the Washington Times, we held to that rule. If we had editorializing to do, we did it in editorial space. We did not do it in our news columns, and that was the standard for a great many years. And yet today, let's just take. We were talking about the complaints by President Trump that the election was fraudulent, and that there was cheating. If you see a reference to that today in any newspaper, you will see it referred to as the mistaken, the false, the fraudulent, even the lie that
it's misinformation.
You bet. And that's an example of something that was never done.
Right.
And even in the journalism schools, about which I have no great feeling, for I never went to one, neither did H.L. Mencken or Westbrook Pegler or some of the greatest journalists in American history. In fact, I remember Pegler telling me that that journalism was not a profession, it was a craft, and that you went to learn it as you would learn how to build a house with a hammer and nails, or how to repair clocks. You didn't go to the university. That wasn't necessary. You just needed a good memory and to follow some very basic rules. And one of those rules, hard stuff, was you never editorialize in news. And yet today, that's what they do, and it is terrible. Now, once we talk about changes, how about the reverse of that? For example, what would you really do about the internet? Would you have all of these comments by anybody saying anything and just let it go? Well, you know what? That's what they used to do in the American press during colonial times. Why and how did they do that? Ours is done by statute. Here's how it's done. There is federal law that says that you can't sue the carrier, that is the company that's carrying this, like Twitter or whoever it is. You can't sue them. They're home free. And so what happens is that nobody is responsible for something that is libelous or extremely hurtful to some individual out of the public eye. So you go on there and say anything you want to say. Now, during colonial times, they did this by adopting pseudonyms. So Hamilton might attack Jefferson. He didn't sign it Hamilton. If he'd signed it Hamilton, there would have been a legal action against him.
Right.
He signed it Cato or Sophocles or something. And so there was an anonymity involved.
Right.
When you go on to the internet, there is an anonymity. They are safe from libel. So they're on there, many of them hiding their identity. You don't see Mr. George Jones of 235 Oak Street. You see whatever their phony name is. Now, when you are talking in public and people who know who you are, you watch your report. You have a byline. You have an interest in A, being accurate, and B, not libeling and falsely making accusations. Well, that was the same thing during colonial times, with the result that the newspapers then and the internet now were places where you could be a sniper. You could hide behind a tree and shoot somebody, and it got real nasty. Pretty easy to handle this. Let's just put real names on those comments and make the people who have things to say responsible for what they say. And what will the consequences of that be?
Well, let me throw out an argument, though. I mean, I wasn't on Facebook for years, and then finally my nephew said, "Oh, hey, Kelly, you got to get on Facebook. It's really cool." So he set me up a Facebook account, and here's what I thought after I finally went on it. Okay, I thought, wow, this is amazing. I did, because I thought I get to hear the American people, their voice, what is bothering them, what they like, what they don't like, and why. And some of the people that would respond to posts were so smart. It was like, wow, I never thought about that. And it made me feel good that I thought for so long, after I stopped working in Congress, I thought the American people were brain dead, okay? Because nobody paid attention to what was going on. That was my feeling. So now I'm looking at this Facebook and I'm going, people are paying attention and they are commenting on what's going on these posts. And I actually really liked that. And that's as far as I'm concerned, Facebook to me is what people are writing. That's what I want to see, is what their responses are, because it tells what the feeling of the country is. So that's a good thing, I think. Okay.
I think it's wonderful. And I love the internet stuff. And I think it ought to be self-edited in the way that it really is, because you have comments on comments and it goes on and on.
Right.
Some of it's a little boring, but
yeah,
most of it provides insight into the mind of America. It's wonderful. It's terrific.
Yeah.
But what's the problem? The problem is
I think
there's
it's censorship.
you
I
bet.
think it's censorship on the part of, here's my argument, and maybe I can throw something in there. I look at Twitter, I look at Facebook, I look at Snapchat, all of these platforms, these social media platforms can decide if your comment is legal. You know, we're not saying something that's offensive. They get to make that decision, at which I'm saying, you know, I think, wait a minute, this is free speech. You can't cut my opinion out. You can't stop me from saying what I want. And I look at television and I look at radio and I go, okay, those are both regulated, okay? And they're a public, they're a social media forum, radio and television. So why isn't Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, why don't they have to live by the same regulations as the other social media, TV and radio?
That, well, we don't want them to be regulated in that
You don't?
way. What we want from them and for them is we want to know who says, where's it come from? It's just the kind of thing we did and we do in journalism.
Yeah, but they're cutting people out. So let's look at it this way. Twitter doesn't allow conservative voices, period. It's like they just don't exist.
Oh, of course, that's outrageous.
So what I'm saying is, why can't they be regulated?
Yes, every one of them ought to be required to be what they pretend to be, which is a public forum. Let's
Right.
reverse that: a forum for the public, not a unedited and controlled environment. And you could do that if you take away their congressionally provided shield,
Right.
and make them responsible, and make the people who are on responsible in their own name as to who they are. I want to see that stuff signed. If you're Joe Blow and you want to claim that your neighbor is having sex with dogs, you're not likely to do that in the local newspaper without being darn sure you're right. And that would also be true online. Now, isn't just a matter of being sure you're right, but it's a matter of the tone of the thing. I mean, people are setting their hair on fire. They're screaming at one another. The nastiness, the insults. We got kids out in the streets shooting one another over insults delivered online. Well, presumably they know where the insults come from because they know, the kids know who's using what name where. Why not just ask everybody to use their own name and watch the tone of it? Watch the tone of it move into more graciousness. Watch it become more thoughtful and closer to reality. I don't say closer to the truth. I think I know what the truth is, but Pontius Pilate didn't know.
So let's look at this. The Biden administration is considering putting up what they call the Disinformation Governance Board, so that the government will decide what information is truthful and what is not.
Oh yes, isn't that wonderful? How lovely of them to do that.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
I think they're going to run into funding problems, which is great. But here's my question. Justice Alito, he made a decision, and back in 2017, and this is the quote. He says the U.S. government may not restrict hate speech. Speech that demeans on the basis of race, ethnicity, gender, religion, age, disability, or other similar grounds is hateful. But the proudest boast of our free speech jurisprudence is that we protect freedom to express the thought that we hate. Okay? In other words, hate speech is completely allowed under the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has said you can be as hateful as you want. Okay?
Yep.
Because
And
that's what free speech is.
And that was always true.
Yeah.
It was always true. But your hate speech then was dealt with by libel laws and slander laws.
Right.
You could then go in to the courts for a
remedy,
civil action.
Yeah.
And you'd be responsible for what you said that actually damaged someone in their profession or with their income in any way.
Right.
And then there were a variety of exceptions which were cited. But that, you know very well as I do, that that's not what's going on with this Disinformation Governance Board. That's to be a ministry of truth.
Yes.
And who has the truth? Well, the high God of whoever the liberal notion of the high God is at the moment. And that would be some twit in the corner who was reliable as to political wokeness. Now, the current twit as the head of the Disinformation Governance Board is Nina Jankowicz, whose performances on TikTok almost most Americans have seen as she fakes a Julie Andrews, a parody of Julie Andrews singing supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, but not the actual words, of course, to that fun song, but words which make clear, it was done before she received the appointment, that made clear that she was speaking a political speech that she wanted to control as disinformation. Now, who is she? Well, she's a 32-year-old woman who went to Bryn Mawr, one of the Tony East Coast finishing schools, white gloves, and all of that tidiness. So she came from, the right sort, and then she had her junior year abroad, as we say. She had hers. She didn't go to Paris. She did not go to Rome. She went to that lovely, graceful city of Moscow. So she goes off to Moscow, and she decides, while in Moscow, that her ambition was to be an expert on disinformation. Now, the very word comes right out of the KGB. It was Marxism-Leninism speech for what the Germans called propaganda, and what we picked up from them, by the way, as a propaganda. So she's an expert, having been trained in Moscow, in propaganda. And she came from there to work enthusiastically for brother Biden. Now, in 2020, she was so committed during that election that she said it was a lie that Russia faked, that was the Hunter Biden laptop material was all a lie, and that Russia had faked it.
Yeah,
and
it was a Russian op.
Oh yeah, and she was full of praise for Christopher Steele, the guy who tacked together the hateful anti-Trump business about urinating on the bed with prostitutes and so forth. So, I mean, this is a really low, very lightweight, obvious person that no reasonable editor for a fair newspaper, if you could find one, would hire. I mean, they would just simply be disqualified, even as a cub reporter.
Let me ask you, did you happen to read the book, The Laptop from Hell, about Hunter Biden's laptop?
No, but I'm aware of it.
It's a remarkable book, and I can tell you that it's very well documented. And when you get done reading it, you actually feel, I felt dirty. That's how bad Hunter Biden's drug use, sexual proclivities, his laundering, his money machine. It's just astounding. It's astounding that this book was written. It is very well documented, and no one is doing anything about what was said in this, what has been released as far as, his money raising, his fundraising for the family.
Sure. That's very serious business, and it isn't just the fundraising. This guy is a howling pervert and a druggie, and I mean, I expect politicians here and there to steal a little, they do that, but perversion, it's drug addiction, helpless sex addiction, outrageous stuff. And the one reason it hasn't moved heavily into public is that there's nobody going to publish this stuff. It's just too filthy.
Yeah, but again, we fall back on the media to do their job. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And they're not. On so many issues, the media.
No, you do your job. You do your job, and you've recommended a book to me. I have one for you. This one is written by Nina Jankowicz, the head of the new Ministry of Truth, and this is her latest book, and it is called "How to Be a Woman Online." Now, apparently, Jankowicz is clever enough that she could identify a woman and define one, without being a biologist. At the same time, you might give this book the title, How to Radicalize Women Online. Again, we're talking about a professional propagandist for the left who has been made the head of the new Ministry of Truth under the most powerful, most gunned bureaucracy in the land, and it is serious business.
Yeah. Well, it's my understanding there's a bill in Congress to remove any funding for it. So, hopefully it won't take off and we won't have to deal with it. But
it will happen if we don't talk about it.
Yes.
And if we don't keep it in the spotlight, because it's almost a self-parody. I mean, remember that Orwell, when he wrote about the Ministry of Truth, Orwell was a socialist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is not because he remained a socialist all of his life, but pretty hard really to parody anything you don't know very well.
Well, don't you think that even if they do this, I mean, the whole point of the First Amendment, freedom of speech, was to allow for dissent against the government, if you so wished, without fear of any kind of reprisal, right? So if they were to do this, and if they decide that information is disinformation, aren't you seeing this as a Supreme Court issue, that the Supreme Court is going to go, no, These people have a right to say this.
This Supreme Court would. Do you think the Warren Court would have? I don't. If they'd been able to get this, if they'd been able to get something like this created in a way that they could propagandize into every home, which they can now do on television, on radio, over the internet, I strongly suspect that the Warren Court would have gone this far. Now, at that time, of course, there were authentic liberals. Now, these liberals are very annoying, and some of them are very silly. But the thing about them, when you've got the real thing, is that you might have an ACLU that would go to Skokie and say, let the Nazis march through the Jewish neighborhood. Now, a lot of this stuff ought to be handled, by decent men going into the streets and knocking the hell out of them. But one of the problems with America is that white Christian men have chickened out, and they're sitting in the back room, humming and hoeing and trying to dispute among themselves the matter of who's transgender or should be. I mean, it's just silliness. And the real America isn't that way at all. These are the public intellectuals. And who are the public intellectuals? Well, the people who call themselves or who were professional liberals. Now we have the professional liberals being elbowed aside by the professional radicals who have a more studied series of tracts because it's older.
Or is it really that? Or is that the media today gives them as much airtime as they want to scream and yell and say just, whatever they want? I mean, the media is definitely leaning all the way to the right, as far as I can tell. Okay, the majority of the media out there today. Would you disagree?
The media.
Sorry, to the left. I'm sorry, to the left. I'm sorry, to the left.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but that the journalism is a young person's business. It takes to do political journalism takes enormous energy. You're up half the night, you're running all over, and where are these politicians? Well, the politicians are in the bars or in the brothels or wherever there is something to be gained personally. So it's a young person's business. And these young reporters, the people who are now running our national media, electronic stuff, the digital stuff, the TV stuff, certainly every aspect of the media. Where are they? Well, they're right out of school, where the incubator is turning out outrageous little ninnies who no, they don't even have courses in Western civilization in these colleges anymore. The courses they have are courses in propaganda. Yeah,
but it gets put on the nightly news, and it gets onto these corporate websites. These aren't kids that are running these big multi,
no, they've still been in school. They moved from the colleges where the stuff is really heavy into the graduate schools. They're at Wharton, or they're at Tuck at Dartmouth, or they're at the business school at Harvard. These are the new corporate bureaucrats, but they're young and they have been heavily influenced for years and years and years and years to take a Marxist view.
You don't think it's a bigger, I mean, like a reset, the reset we hear about all the time with the Klaus Schwab group and the Bill Gates and, you know, the World Economic Forum, who want this, you know, this reset where you'll own nothing and be happy mentality.
Yeah, well, you know, that stuff comes out of the think tanks, which are in turn financed by the great fortunes of people who hated everything about them. And they've been taken over. They've been taken over by the left, Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation. Imagine what Henry Ford Sr. would have thought about the Ford Foundation. And of course, these guys then turn out the papers and the organizations of intellectual certitude, and they are the keepers of the high culture, and they are the rewarders of the woke points of view, and they develop the early stuff. Look, there are insiders to the establishment, and who are they? Well, they're the guys and gals now running the real financial interests of the world, and they in turn operate based on their interests. And what you get, these insiders are the servants of the great interests coming together in confluence and paying intellectuals to turn out the stuff that profits them.
Right.
Now, so
is it deliberate? Is it a deliberate attempt to change the moral compass of a country or the social direction? Is this
sure,
is
the ideologues want to do that. The ideologues do, but you think the businessmen want to do that? You think the guys who sold a whole city that made commercial airliners that were originally designed as bombers to Beijing? You think they were interested in anything but profit? No. But Henry Kissinger and the boys were in there first and set up the deal, thought through the justification, and now their successors go for the big profits. The great fortunes, most of the great fortunes, were built with the aid and support of government. Only government was big enough to create these oligopolies and monopolies, and to let them keep going until they got big enough that they were too big to suffocate.
right.
And so it goes on and on.
Speaking of fortunes, let's talk a little bit before we have to end this. But let's talk about Elon Musk. You know, he's apparently the Twitter deal is going to go through. And he is pretty clear that in fact, he's blatantly saying that he will not allow any more exclusion of any kind of conservatives on Twitter, that everybody's going to be allowed to be on it. You know, do you think he is the savior of social media, or is this some sort of personal game for him? I don't know. Is there what can he get out of it other than what he appears to be, which is somebody who just wants to run an honest social media platform?
Well, just yesterday, Musk, who has 91 million followers on Twitter, Musk, the richest man in the world, twice as rich as number two, as rich as number two, Musk was, well, in 2000, he supported Kanye West. A few years before that, he was busy sleeping with Johnny Depp's wife. He came out of South Africa with his mother. He had dual citizenship. She was a Canadian, and he was a very smart guy. Probably somewhere on the Asperger's line, but eccentric, but brilliant. And brilliant as to maneuvering, and brilliant as to his understanding of physics. An amazing man.
Yeah, I mean,
on the other hand,
facts are pretty interesting.
You've got eccentricities like his comparing Trudeau to Hitler, or he opposed the masking and the lockdowns. He's very mixed on this stuff, but it looks like he's leaning to the right, which means what? Well, in this case, it means that he'd be for a little more balance. That's something on the internet. But he's been a subscriber to the ACLU for many years. I mean, when he was sleeping with Johnny Depp's wife, and Depp settled a sum of money on her, she agreed or announced that she was going to give the bulk of it away to charity, and her favorite charity was the ACLU. Well, turns out she didn't give that sum to the ACLU. The guy who gave it in her stead was her lover, Brother Musk, who wrote the check to the ACLU. Now, was that because he agreed with the idea, or he agreed with the lady? I can't say, but I can say this: he has continued to make presents to the ACLU. Now, that seems to me that it could suggest one of two things. One is that he really is a for real civil libertarian, or two, there's some kind of lefty masking the whole game. And the ACLU did not begin as an honest outfit. It began as a communist front, and it then moved away from its control by actual communists running board, moved away from it, and for a time in the 50s and early 60s, it was authentically civil libertarian as to speech, and they were doing a pretty good job. Then they got grabbed again, and they're now an arm of the radical woke. So it's hard to tell where this guy is, who he's given what to, and but it's one awful big lot of money. Now, he doesn't own the Washington Post, and he didn't buy newspapers. What's he know? Well, you stick to the devil, and the devil he knows is electronics. It's the digital stuff.
That's where most people today go to, is to their electronic. They don't go out to the front porch and pick up the newspaper. They just don't.
You betcha. And
so
for investors, especially international investors, which he surely is, there was an old line a century and a half ago. It was, where coal is, there is my nation. And then for a time it was, where oil is, there is my nation. Today, it's where the cutting edge of electronics are. There is my nation, for there is where the money is. So if you're doing that kind of money until you get so big rich you can do as you damn well please, which he now is,
right,
you accommodate. I know old H.L. Hunt at the time he was not only the most radical right-winger in America, probably the world, was the richest man in the world. And he used to make regular contributions to left-wing organizations in order to keep them off his back.
Okay. So where do you think we're going? Do you think that we're going to continue to have, sort of one-sided reporting, and just going to have to put up with our Ministry of Disinformation? Is there hope? Is there hope that we might be more balanced in reporting?
I have little hope for the professional reporters, except to this extent. The big profits in television are clearly where? Who has it? Who's making the dough? It's Fox News. Right. It's the New York Post. Mm-hmm. It's, my goodness, it's them fellas on the right. So right. As that, the money will follow the opportunity. So mm-hmm. I expect we're going to see, I think that's what the game will be in the electronic publishing. Where's it going to go? I don't know. It depends on how fiercely the public at large is willing to defend its personal rights. And that is why freedom of speech and freedom of press and freedom of religion, those First Amendment guarantees, mm-hmm. not to mention the Second Amendment, of course, right. In order to be sure that they don't come in with their guns and take the rest of it. All of that is so important, and it's important that we have grouches in every corner, grouches on our side, grouches on their side, in a free fall right. of debate. Right. So you have your hand right on the most important stuff, as you always did. That's why you've always been such a good reporter. Well,
Scott, I just wanted to say I remember when I was reporting for Insight Magazine, what was nice is that during our editorial meetings, when we would pitch stories, the nice thing about it was that the editorial staff was really good about allowing anything to be written as long as we could prove it. If we had the documentation to support it, it was go for it. And it didn't matter if it was right or left. And I remember one day you and I had a conversation in your office, and I said, Scott, the difference between me and you is that you think right and left, and I think right and wrong. And we both started laughing. And I think that when we were working there, it didn't matter if the story was real, it didn't really matter if it was right and left. We could go with it as long as we could prove it. And I really want to thank you for that. I think you were instrumental in that kind of a mentality at the time. And we all put out a lot of good news and articles. And
but we wanted it balanced. We wanted it balanced, Kelly. You remember, it wasn't so far as go out if you've got you've got an exclusive reporter with Jesus, go out. And we can't run that until you go out and get a comment from the devil. I mean, it wasn't that extreme, but there was a conscious effort to balance a story. Go talk to somebody on the other side because it was more interesting.
Right.
One of the problems with the right-wing press, as with the left-wing press, is it's not realistic if all you're looking at is a screamer on the right side of the room or a screamer on the left side of the room. Those voices do not go to the middle where the power is. They go over their heads. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, well, Scott, it's like pictures. It's like pictures, Kelly. If you and I see this mistake being made in journals and on television, online all the time. They go out and get a picture of someone they don't like picking their nose in a hideous smirk, or say, no, no, who are you trying to reach? You're trying to reach the people who see the picture first. So you want the friends of Mr. X, the bad guy. You want everybody, but especially the friends, to come and listen to what you have to say. So that makes the best polemic, the best propaganda. It makes it balanced because it is effective.
Yeah, well, I think we did that, and I'm proud of the work we did at Insight. And anyway, I've enjoyed this. I got to let you go, but thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. You're always interesting. I feel like I'm sitting in your office now, just shooting the whatever. And I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Scott.
Just a joy to be with you.
Take care, buddy.
Bye.